Before lawmakers draw or release any new maps, advocates want assurances the public will have a real say in the outcome. 3 on your side's Courtney Ann Jackson explains.
Calais does not require Mississippi to redistrict. Nothing in the decision says Mississippi has to redraw its lines before the next census. Nothing.
That's the concern being raised by voting rights advocates as Mississippi lawmakers begin holding hearings on potential new legislative, judicial, and congressional maps. Senator Johnny Dupree says they're worried the public hearings are more for show.
We have no maps. So where are we? It gives us the impression that decisions have already been made and we're checking boxes, that we're crossing T's, that we're dotting I's when things have already been determined. What we're asking for is transparency.
The House Select Committee on Redistricting met Monday to hear an overview of the process, while a separate joint committee is expected to ultimately handle the map drawing, a task experts say is complex.
Quite frankly, the task is monumental for every state, but for Mississippi it's even bigger because we have unique population shifts.
House Select Committee Chairman Noah Sanford views this panel as a study committee.
We may have another hearing just to hear sort of more of what we did today in detail about considerations of redistricting, but the meat of the work will be in the joint committee.
Sanford says lawmakers will likely use the state's most recent maps as their starting point.
I don't anticipate major changes.
Joint Committee's first public hearing is scheduled for August 18th. Governor Tate Reeves has indicated he may call lawmakers into special session before the 2027 regular session begins. Courtney Ann Jackson, 3 on your side.